Hi guys, it's Vanessa coming to you from the garden just northwest of Austin in zone 9A in Texas. And today I'm at a garden you may not recognize if you have not followed me for very long. This garden is the teaching garden, and it was created in a suburban backyard to mimic almost like a market garden. And as you can see, it's very big, and this used to be a lawn. Now, we called this garden the teaching garden because we started holding classes here, but then we ended up having major issues with a neighbor who had a rat infestation. So in-person classes got put on hold while we figured out that situation, and I'm happy to say that the garden is now producing food again. And it means that we are loaded down with okra and cucumbers. So today I'm going to show you some basics of pickling. We're going to do pickled okra, pickled red onions, and pickled cucumbers, all from the garden. So let's go harvest and then we'll get into it. This area back here is where the majority of our okra and cucumbers are growing, and along the fence you can see some crazy looking asparagus ferns. So let's go check out what's there. We've already done quite a bit of harvesting, but there's still some left on the plants for us to gather, and then it will be time to do some super basic intro beginner pickling technique.
Here are the cucumbers. Some of these are actually pickling cucumbers, some of them are slicers, but they're all like a medium-sized cucumber, and these are growing straight out of the ground. We have amended the soil with cover crops, and we use drip tape for irrigation, but for the most part these are just growing straight out of the ground. Pretty straightforward. They're really happy. They have pretty good drainage and lots of full sun, and we do have some shade cloths in this area as well. And then the dill is at the tail end just because it's getting so hot outside, so we're getting the remainder of the dill, and yes, you can pickle using dill flowers. And this doesn't seem like a big harvest, but we already harvested a lot.
Vanessa?
Yes? Okay. This is what happens when you let your okra go midsummer because it's too hot, and then it just reseeds everywhere, and then you also don't thin out the new seedlings. So anyways, welcome to the okra forest.
There are two varieties in the okra forest, and they are the Hill Country Red Okra, which is the majority of these, and they make fat little stubby pods, but they are delicious and crunchy. And then some red burgundy okra, which is a little bit thinner and longer like the Clemson spineless green okra, but it has some red hues at the tip. But yeah, we have a lot of okra coming in, so the easiest thing to do to move through a lot of okra quickly, one, you could fry it and eat a bunch at once, or two, you can pickle it. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, I gotta talk to you guys about the reason this video exists today, and that is these Garden in Minutes irrigation grids. We have these in the perennial areas of the teaching garden. They were kind enough to send enough for us to cover our blackberry beds and the asparagus beds, and this is what they look like. They come with manifolds if you like to add on and connect multiple beds, and then as soon as you install them the first time, you just plop them in right on top of the surface of the soil. You can mulch on top of them, and then you just angle the sprays the way that you want them to, obviously not straight up in the air. And then that's it. You have irrigation completely set. These things will do a really good soak really quickly, so we do not have to run irrigation for very long at all in the raised bed perennial areas. And you can actually control the flow with their manifolds. Everything from Garden in Minutes has always been top notch for me. They've lasted for years and I love them. You can find a link with a discount code in the caption of this video. Now let's get to pickling. So we've got some pickling cukes, some slicing cukes, dill, jalapenos, Mustang grape leaves, okra, dragon egg cucumbers that are from my garden, and some onions and garlic, and I think I'm going to pickle the dragon eggs whole. Now, if you're wondering why I'm using Mustang grape leaves inside of my jars of pickles, it's because they're very high in tannins, and they are prolifically invasive in my area, so I can get them just about anywhere. I rinse them really well, and I toss one leaf in about each jar. Now, we're doing a couple different brines today, a basic vinegar brine and a bread and butter brine.
So the first thing we need to do is wash our jars with hot soap and water, and then the easiest way that we like to sterilize jars just for pickling
is to boil the jars in the canner beforehand, and it's dual use. I already have the canner or my pot of hot water out, and I boil them for 10 minutes at a rolling boil and then place them on a dry towel clean surface kind of area. Now you can do this with a regular pot, but a canner has a rack. This is a water bath canner, and it has this rack inside of it, which then will keep your jars from directly being on the heat or flame, which can help avoid them cracking, but you can use a terry cloth towel at the bottom of a regular pot to get the same effect. After sterilization, we put the jars
in the oven at 200 degrees, not the lids and the rings, but just the jar. It keeps them warm. The whole trick with pickling is just to make sure that you keep your glass jar warm the entire time. So you want warm brine, warm jars going into a hot pot. That way you don't shock the glass, because although ball canning jars are pretty sturdy, any type of glass, tempered or not, has the potential to crack if you have extreme temperature changes. So the first thing we're doing is washing the jars, putting them in an environment to sterilize them, getting our brine put together on the stove, and chopping the vegetables that we'll pickle today.
Our basic brine recipe starts with 1 cup of distilled white vinegar, 5%, 1 cup of water, and 1 tablespoon of kosher salt or pickling salt. To pickle our okra, we're using a pickling spice that's pre-made. It usually has bay leaf, peppercorn, clove, allspice, coriander, sometimes dill seeds. We're adding some fresh dill, and then we're going to pack this jar with okra. With okra, it likes to float in the brine, so you really, really want to pack it in. You can cut your okra before you pickle it. We like to pickle ours whole, and we like to pick it young, so it's these nice bite-sized pieces. We're going to fill it with that basic brine to about 1/2 inch of space to the top of the jar, and really, really pack it in there. Debubble, remove any bubbles with a blunt knife, and then press that in. Make sure the rim of this jar doesn't have any liquid on it. That way there's no issues with the seal. And then tighten the ring over the lid just to finger tight. And at this point, if you didn't want to can it, you could just keep this refrigerated, and now you've made pickled okra. Now, to pickle these dang whole dragon egg cucumbers, I needed to use a quart-sized jar, and I think I can fit maybe 3 in there. So I'm starting with some dill. I'm doing the Mustang grape leaf, pickling spice, garlic, and onion. So I'm just loading this down. I'm using the basic brine recipe, and then I always like to put onions in my personal pickles. And I think I can fit 3 of these dragon eggs in this jar. It took quite a bit of finagling to make these fit in here, but we got her done. I'm filling it with the brine, same level of headspace, leaving about 1/2 inch above that brine, and then putting the lid on and closing the ring just finger tight, which means you can gently open it without having to grip it super hard. And now we're going to move on to the bread and butter pickles, which are made a little differently. Typically, bread and butter pickles are sliced onions in a nice ring shape or spear cucumber, and instead of putting the salt in the brine, you're actually going to draw moisture out of the veggies over the period of 4 hours in the fridge covered with that salt. Then you're going to make a brine using apple cider vinegar as the base, and I call it a sweet heat brine because I always like to put extra red pepper flakes in mine. And then you're going to use 1.5 cups of sugar. This is not a healthy recipe, but it's my favorite. Turmeric might balance out the sugar health factor there. And then red pepper flakes, mustard, some pickling spice. I like extra mustard powder in mine. You can do it however you want. And then we're first going to use this bread and butter pickling brine for some pickled red onions, because I've never tried like a bread and butter red onion, and that sounds really fun. So I'm going to do that first while I'm letting the cucumbers and the white onions kind of brine and draw out their liquid in the fridge. I'm also heating the bread and butter brine while I'm doing this. So I'm just filling a jar as far as I can with the red onions. Honestly, I could have cut a whole other red onion and put it inside of here, and it still would have been fine. So my red onions were floating a little bit towards the end. Kind of that same issue with the example jar I showed you of the floating okra previously. Now look how beautiful this bread and butter pickle brine is with the turmeric and the apple cider vinegar and the red pepper flakes. I don't know, I think these are just going to be some really pretty pickled onions, and this is the same brine that I'll be using on the cucumbers and white onions here shortly. Now the next piece is to take a few more jars out of the warm space in the oven and drain off that salt brine from the cucumbers and white onions that were sitting in the fridge while we were preparing all the other pickled items. And then I'm just layering these in to where they're a little more evenly spaced between onions and kind of cucumber pickles in the jar. You can just dump it in if you want, but same MO here. We're going to do brine about 1/2 inch from the top of the jar or above the level of the brine to the bottom of that lid. And I did sneak a few jalapeno slices into this one. And then once these guys are ready to go, we're going to move on to the last bit of cucumbers. Now, these are regular schmegular pickles. This is actually kind of a slicer cucumber, so they may not be as crunchy as a pickling cucumber. The thing about slicers is they can be pickles or they can be freshly eaten. Pickling cucumbers are really only best eaten pickled, if that makes sense. This is a huge unibulb of garlic that I grew unsuccessfully, but it's going to do just fine inside of some pickle jars. And then when you're measuring your spears, do like a test cut so that you can make sure they're not too long for your jars. ask me how I know to do that. So we're going to do some spears and some coins, and you can do fun stuff with a peeler on the outside of the cucumber before you make your coins or your spears too, if you want something more visually appealing. And then if you really want to pack your spears in nicely, using gravity and laying the jar sideways can be really helpful for this. And then the same thing over and over again. Pickling spice, a little bit of red pepper flakes. You can do onions and garlic if you like. You can do mustard powder, mustard seed, dill seed, fresh dill, jalapenos. There's so many options, but these are just what I'm choosing to do right now because this is what we have on hand. And then I magically poured brine over these and forgot to record it, but same thing, 1/2 inch headspace, lids on, finger tight, clean the edge of the jar, make sure there's no liquid. It helps make sure everything seals. And right now you could put these in your fridge and just keep them in your fridge and eat them, and you'd have pickles.
As we're heating up the water bath canner, we need the water bath canner to be at a rolling boil, and then we put our jars in, and it's best to see if you can get enough jars to fill up the whole canner, just in case you have a little bit of bubble action moving around your jars and you don't want one to knock over. If you don't have enough jars to fill your canner, then you can put empty jars inside of it, and that will help everything stay together. Now, it depends on what size of jar you are water bathing and your altitude to decide how long you need to put those jars in the water bath canner for a set amount of time after it reaches a rolling boil. For us, we're doing 15 minutes.
And then we're removing them very carefully onto a towel on the countertop, and we're just not going to touch them for 24 hours. There are some things you need to be careful with. One, space them out a little bit so that they can actually cool down, but don't put a fan on them because you don't need them to cool down rapidly. Remember, no fast changes in temperature. And then we did another round. The dragon egg cucumbers took quite a bit longer to finish, maybe like 5 to 7 minutes longer. And then we did another round, but it really only took about 3 batches. If we had a taller canner, we probably could have double stacked them, but it was fine. We just kind of dribbled along this and got it knocked out as we had time. And then there's one more thing you're looking for to make sure these would be a shelf-stable pickle. These will naturally seal with the amount of heat that we gave them, and they are pretty preserved because of the vinegar. But we're looking to listen for a pop. There is a center little button in the middle, and you don't want to manually push it down. But as things cool down, if there was a proper seal, that pop will happen. And if that pop doesn't happen, that's okay. You just toss it in the fridge and eat them like normal. That one's not pop, but the rest of these are.
Well, we finished up our canning for the day. I think we've got a pretty good amount here, and we've got everything from regular dill pickle spears, dill pickle coins, some pickled okra, bread and butter pickles, and some bread and butter pickled red onions, and some pickled dragon egg cucumbers. I hope this video has been helpful for you today to feel more comfortable with processing the produce that you get out of your garden. Don't be afraid to try out some new recipes, some new techniques, and you don't have to buy a bunch of equipment to get started on basic pickling techniques if you don't have the ability or don't want to. Get out there and get your hands dirty and maybe get into the kitchen, because remember, if you never grow, you'll never know.